So I'm delighted to be here with all of you, helping to moderate to the extent I can make any contributions on this session. And the subject is really interesting to me, of course, as of law, power, and ecology. I'm a lawyer with a background in teaching environmental justice and civil procedure, working now in environmental law, and primarily in the past have been working in government. Worked for a bit as a journalist and spent a summer in Ecuador volunteering for a program called Partnership for Service Learning, but spent a bit of time in the Amazon then. This was, decades ago, but so this it's all coming together in our discussion today. But I'd love to open it up to Steve. May I call you Steve, or is it Stephen? Donziger to present today.
Yeah, thank you. It's
Yep.
Stephen. I also answer to Steve.
Okay, Stephen.
Thank you for hosting. Hello, everybody. Always a pleasure to share my thoughts with anything related to the Global Justice Program at Yale. Thank you, Professor, for organizing this program and all the great work that you do and this program does over just a whole variety of issues. So I'm honored to be here. I'm going to speak for just a few minutes to sort of review my particular story. It's a personal story, but it has really implications far beyond me. And I think it touches upon many of the themes that the Global Justice Program really focuses on and that I think have been focused on during this conference. So to try to make a long story short, I'm a human rights attorney based in New York City. I have worked with other lawyers in Ecuador and other countries to represent for many, many years indigenous peoples and farmer communities in the Amazon region of Ecuador in a case against Chevron, the big American oil company. And this case really derives from really horrific acts of pollution and violence inflicted by another American oil company, Texaco, on the indigenous groups who live in this region of Ecuador, which is the northern part of the Amazon, just south of the Colombia border. And essentially what happened, the underlying facts of what happened is that Texaco went into this region in the late 1960s and designed a system of oil extraction intended to pollute. So Texaco built hundreds of wells in a 1,500 square mile area. And they took all the oil waste that comes with drilling wells, which involves perforating thousands of feet into the ground and bringing up all sorts of heavy metals and other man-made cancer-causing chemicals. And they essentially dumped all of this extremely harmful material into open air pits, unlined pits that they had gouged out of the jungle floor. And to this day, now over 50 years later in this region are literally hundreds of these open air pits, which continue to seep their contents, their cancer-causing contents into soils and groundwater that people rely on for drinking via digging wells. And they also, in many of these pits, installed a piping system to allow, when it rained in the Amazon, and it rains frequently, to allow the oil waste to flow into streams and rivers that indigenous peoples were relying on for their drinking water, bathing, and fishing. Predictably, over time, the entire ecosystem in this area became polluted. And the people living there who had for millennia lived off of the forest and were very wealthy and prosperous, although not in the way we in the North or in many parts of the material world think about being wealthy. People had no actual money, but they had really nice lifestyles. And the lifestyles were dependent on, clean air, clean water, and an environment that was sustainable and pristine. And all of this in a matter of years was ruined. And over time, many people who lived in this region, who were exposed on a daily basis to all sorts of cancer-causing toxins by the air they breathed, the water they drank, the food they ate, contracted cancer and other diseases, and many have died. I would say thousands and thousands of people in this region have died over the years since this started, although it's impossible to know precisely how many, because there's never been sort of a comprehensive epidemiological study. There have been studies sort of on the form of health evaluations that have been solid studies published in peer-reviewed journals that show dramatically increased cancer rates in this region of Ecuador compared to other parts of Ecuador where Texaco/Chevron did not operate. As I'm a lawyer, so we decided to represent people affected, and we filed a legal case against Texaco in 1993 in New York. We fought for 10 years to get into the courthouse. Texaco and their lawyers were, just tenaciously fighting to prevent a trial from happening. Ultimately, they convinced the U.S. courts to send the case down to Ecuador so the case could be tried in Ecuador's courts. They were hoping we would disappear and go away. As a condition of that, sort of limited legal victory for them, they were forced by the U.S. court to accept the jurisdiction of Ecuador's courts and agree to abide by any adverse judgment against them that might come out of the Ecuador trial. So we kept going, we being a group of American lawyers allied with Ecuadorian lawyers, and kept doing the same case under Ecuadorian law down in Ecuador. And that part of this journey lasted 8 years, largely because Chevron, by the way, had bought Texaco in 2001. So they took over the defense of the case. And that part lasted 8 years, largely because they tried to sabotage the trial every step of the way. Ultimately, we
Can I
were
ask you a
able to.
question on the in terms of the claims for the non-lawyers here? I mean, for the lawyers or non-lawyers, it looks like, at least initially, there was a whole range of claims of negligence, nuisance, various torts. But what were the sort of strongest claims, especially when you got into the Ecuadorian courts?
So we sued. So that's a great question. It's sort of a legal question, but when you bring, this is a civil case, so we're bringing claims for money damages, get money from Chevron for the damage they caused to the people, to compensate them for the harm. So as a result of having to shift the case from U.S. courts, where we could use U.S. law, to Ecuador's courts, where we had to sort of refashion the claims to fit Ecuadorian law, the primary claim, we had traditional tort claims which exist in Ecuador, but there's also a statute down there called the Environmental Management Act that allowed us to really, it allows individuals to sue for the collective. It's sort of similar to a class action mechanism that we have here, but it doesn't have, the ability to sort of use individual personal injuries as part of the claim. So it's a little complicated. I would say the procedural opportunities in Ecuador's system compared to the United States are definitely more limited. I mean, there really is no class action for personal injury, so that we really had to knock out a bunch of the case and just focus on collective environmental cleanup rather than compensation to any individual harm. So to this day, and this case is still very much alive, but to this day, there's no mechanism through this case to compensate someone who got cancer or someone who lost a family member to cancer. It just doesn't exist. But there is a way to get billions of dollars into Ecuador to help clean up the environmental harm. So I would say that's the main thing that was different about having to do the case in Ecuador. In any event, by the way, anyone can ask any question at any time. I know this is a relatively small group of people. I just want to say that once we won the case, and we did win the case in 2011 at the trial court level, and it was affirmed by Ecuador's highest court unanimously in 2013. And the initial judgment at the trial court level was roughly $18-19 billion. half of which was a punitive damages claim, that is like a punishment component, because what they had done was so egregious, because it was intentional, and because they had tried to really undermine the administration of justice in Ecuador during our trial. On appeal, though, that piece of our damages got eliminated by Ecuador Supreme Court. So we're basically left with about 9.5 billion in damages. And, I want to say two things. One is that is the largest amount of damages judgment ever won by indigenous peoples in a court of law. And that's a historic achievement for which, all the communities in Ecuador are very, very proud. The other thing is the amount, while it might seem large, is actually quite modest compared to the magnitude of the damage. By way of comparison, BP, for its accidental oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, accidental because they weren't trying to spill oil when the Deepwater Horizon fire happened or blowout happened. Unlike in Ecuador, where Texaco and Chevron deliberately designed a system to pollute. But even in the BP thing, which is a result of negligence in the Gulf of Mexico, BP has now paid out approximately $75 billion in fines and in compensation to those who were damaged by the spill. Whereas in Ecuador, which is much more extensive, has lasted a lot longer, was intentional, the judgment is really a fraction of that. And they still have not paid even the first dollar. And rather than pay the people they harmed in Ecuador, Chevron has behaved very, very cynically. And they have attacked me for the most part. They came back to New York in the very court that we initially filed the underlying environmental claims in, here in federal court in Manhattan, to sue me personally for $60 billion, which is the most amount of money anyone in this country has ever been sued for. They sued me under a civil RICO statute, and they paid a witness $2 million plus to come into court. They prepped him for 53 days, and he testified he was in a meeting with me where I approved a bribe of the trial judge in Ecuador. This was all just flat out made up. I never approved, nor would I, a bribe of anyone in the judicial system or in any context. So, they had this witness they paid. They still pay him hush money. He's living in the United States. He's an Ecuadorian man. They bought him a house. They got him lawyers. They pay his income taxes. And he testified falsely against me. And the judge here in the United States who had the case denied me a jury. He tried the case himself. I'm the only defendant in US history under the federal RICO statute, the civil RICO statute, who's ever been denied a jury. And in my opinion, the fix was in, and the whole thing was a show trial designed to, do a number of things. One is protect Chevron's assets from people in Ecuador. Two is to destroy the lawyer who, was instrumental in bringing the case, meaning me, as a way to signal to other lawyers, you're really not allowed to do these cases at this level. And I think it was really designed to send a message of intimidation to human rights workers and environmental justice workers. Now, I'll say that despite this ridiculous case, unfounded case, we kept going in foreign courts to enforce the Ecuador judgment, and we won a unanimous Supreme Court decision in the country of Canada, allowing the affected communities in Ecuador the right to enforce their judgment against Chevron's assets in Canada, which is an oil-producing nation, and where Chevron has literally billions and billions of dollars of assets, enough to cover the entirety of the Ecuador judgment. Well, that really scared Chevron, and their next move was then to convince this judge to charge me with criminal contempt of court. Okay, in other words, the other case, which I think was the intimidation mechanism, was a civil case for money. The judge created a criminal case on the theory that I had appealed one of his, I think, illegal orders that I turn over my computer and confidential case file to Chevron's lawyers in the middle of a litigation, which is an unprecedented order that completely violates the attorney-client privilege and other privileges that are sacrosanct in any adversarial system of justice. And on the basis of me appealing that order to a higher court, the judge had me locked up, for appealing an order that he himself had originally issued. It was extraordinary. And he then assigned another judge to the case. Most cases in New York, I mean, actually all cases are required to be assigned randomly. And he just gave it to a judge who's a member of the Federalist Society, which Chevron funds. And the charge, which was a misdemeanor contempt of court charge, was taken to the U.S. attorney, the U.S. prosecutor, who refused to prosecute me. And the judge then appointed a Chevron lawyer to prosecute me on his contempt charge. I was, at that point, became the first, and to this day, the only person in the history of the United States of America who's ever been prosecuted by a corporation, in this case, Chevron. I was subject to a private criminal prosecution by an oil company that acted in the name of the US government. Like on their papers that they would file in court against me, they would put the name of the Chevron lawyer, and underneath it, not Chevron, they'd put United States government, on the theory that this judge who charged me gave them that authority. And it's completely illegal. In any event, they did it anyway. And I ended up spending almost 3 years in detention between house arrest and prison. I just ended this part of my ordeal about 1.5 years ago, and I'm out doing my work and advocating, but they refused to return me my passport. I cannot leave the country. I cannot visit my clients in Ecuador or work on any other cases. And they also disbarred me without a hearing in New York. They basically refused to give me a fact hearing where I could challenge the findings of fact from this judge who charged me criminally and denied me a jury on 2 different occasions. So, honestly, the fix was in. It's a sad chapter in the history of the United States of America and its judiciary. I'm not naive. I know things like this can happen in every country in the world, including the United States. I'm not naive. I don't mean to suggest that what's happened to me is worse than what's happened to probably many millions of other people in this country through weaponizing our criminal justice system to attack people who somehow, either because of the color of their skin or they get in a bad way with the police, get hit hard and get locked up and they're innocent. And, some are actually murdered by police. So, I don't want to suggest, that I'm in some special category, but I do want to emphasize that what happened to me has never happened to anyone before. That the part that's never happened to anyone before, to me, is the complete integration between corporate power, this oil company, and the judicial system. The judicial system is supposed to protect people's rights and protect the vulnerable. Instead, it became an instrument of corporate power to try to destroy the vulnerable, being me. So, I'm still digesting what this means. I'd never seen it before. I speak out about it as much as I possibly can, including being in places like this event today. So, the story is one of deep meaning. I do want to say this, though. It's not all a sad story. Because the reality is, when I was locked up, most of that time in my house with an ankle bracelet, I got the support of so many people around the world, perhaps some of you folks on this call. 68 Nobel laureates signed a letter demanding my release. 120 NGOs, some of the most prominent NGOs in the world in the human rights field and other environmental justice field and law fields were advocating for me. They all signed a letter to President Biden to demand that he pardon me. Ironically, I've gotten support from extremely conservative, places in our society. The craziest part is I ultimately appealed my misdemeanor contempt conviction on the contempt of court charge to the U.S. Supreme Court. And by the way, the U.S. Supreme Court almost never, they take very few cases. They take 1 out of 100 cases that people send up. They never take a misdemeanor criminal case. This case on paper is very insignificant, but of course, because of how it went down, it's actually quite significant. And they really came very close to taking my case and reversing my conviction For various reasons, it did not happen, reasons related to, I think, the pro-corporate tilt of the court. But the funny part is two of the very conservative justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, with whom I agree on almost nothing, issued an opinion about my case saying that it was unconstitutional how I was treated and that my conviction should have been reversed. So it was the two of the conservatives who stood up for me. The three so-called centrist liberals, Kagan, Ketanji Jackson Brown, and Sonia Sotomayor, were silent. If two of those three had joined the two that spoke out, the case would have been before the Supreme Court. They probably would have ended up ruling 9-0 to reverse my conviction. But they didn't have the institutional fortitude, courage to take this case. And as a result, private corporate prosecutions are technically legal in this country, even though I'm the only one it's happened to. And I actually, despite my questions about the US judiciary, I would find it very hard to believe any other judge, but this particular judge would ever do such a thing, because it's so crazy and it's never happened. It's not only never happened here, I've never seen it happen in any country in the world. So out of this experience, I believe I've emerged stronger. The critical issue of the welfare of the people of Ecuador who are suffering from the pollution remains. Luckily, the judgment that these communities won with my help still exists. It's viable. There's no statute of limitations on foreign judgment enforcement, meaning they can go to any country in the world where Chevron has assets to collect on their judgment if they have enough resources and legal help. It makes it much more difficult that the main guy who is helping them is stuck, unable to travel. I think it's not a coincidence. They still have my passport on the theory that I still haven't given them my computer. I live in a situation where they could literally initiate criminal contempt charges any day they want and put me right back in detention if they wanted. There's nothing legally to stop them. So I live with this fear. I have a wife and a 17-year-old son. We've been living with this for a number of years. We've been extremely determined not to let Chevron steal our happiness as people and as a family. And while there have been some tough times, largely I believe we have succeeded. We are cool, we're together, and we have the life not exactly like the one we thought we would have, but like there's been a lot of other glorious aspects to how we are now that we never would have had otherwise. I'm not celebrating it, to be clear, but I'm just saying I think it's very important as you embark on whatever journey you're on, and I know many of you are already on some very important and very significant journeys, political or otherwise. Resilience is really, really important, because if you're going to be effective, you're going to meet resistance. And to understand resistance and how to deal with it, both personally, psychologically, is really important, but also to understand that, and I believe this to be true, with every piece of resistance you confront, every person or institution that tries to get in your way, get in the way of justice, block you, neutralize you, in that whole process are a lot of opportunities to actually get it to a higher level that you otherwise might not have been able to do. That is trying to really take the attacks, flip the frame, and use them to grow bigger. And that's what we have very much tried to do. We have a long way to go because the people of Ecuador still need, the team of lawyers to be able to go out there and collect on this judgment and save lives. But, I'm proud of what these communities have accomplished. They won the case, and to be clear, the attacks on me are a function of us winning the case, not anything that Chevron says we did wrong, because we did nothing wrong. And I'll remind people that 6 different appellate courts, both in Ecuador and in Canada, have ruled in favor of the Ecuador judgment, for one purpose or another. So, it's just this one trial judge in New York who really, I think, has a colonial imperialist mentality, to be frank, looks at people in this global South as inferior and incapable of being able to issue court judgments of this magnitude. And that one trial judge is really trying to destroy this entire case. It's been affirmed by Ecuador's Supreme Court and Ecuador's Constitutional Court and Canada's Supreme Court. And I'll just leave it at this. Imagine if a trial judge in Ecuador tried to issue a ruling that in effect would overturn a final decision of the US Supreme Court. Because that's essentially what this US judge is doing. But of course, because it's the US and we're trained in this country to believe we can rule the world, and it's in our consciousness at such a deep level, it doesn't even seem abnormal. Oh, a US trial judge ruled that a decision by Ecuador's Supreme Court is a fraud. Then it must be a fraud. I mean, that's actually how a lot of Americans think, because they just assume that a US judge knows more than the entire Supreme Court of Ecuador. So that sort of structural racism, colonialism that we see in so many of our institutions, in our heads. And I'm telling you, this is true even among progressives in this country. Like, it's in us. It gets in us, in our way of thinking. I went to Harvard Law School. This is how we are taught. It's sort of what you assume you are when you come out of these institutions. And it really takes a long time to understand that. I'm talking as a North American now. To sort of deprogram yourself, from this way of thinking, because it really affects how you go about your business. But I'm telling you, it's because of this way of thinking that only in the United States would a trial judge actually believe he could do such a thing and get away with it. It's extraordinary. So I will stop there. I don't know if there's any questions. I just want everyone to know that I'm well, and I am really, really happy to be here. And I also want to just mention that I'm going to be launching the week after next a new campaign to get a pardon from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, that we're going to use to really try to organize really the entire world around my case so I can have my full rights back as a human rights lawyer. But more importantly, use my case to draw attention to these increasing global attacks on protest, on advocacy, on people doing climate justice campaigns, on people protesting police abuse, like we're seeing in the city of Atlanta right now, in the US state of Georgia. Because I think my case is a symbol of something deeply nefarious that's going on in the United States and also many countries around the world. So thank you for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I do have a couple we could start off with. So do you see as potentially counteracting some of those trends you were highlighting as a positive change? Well, I'm sure you see it as a positive change, but can you talk a bit about the increase in lawsuits by young people bringing claims like the one in Montana, in which they just achieved a great victory, arguing the state's energy policy violated their constitutional rights to a clean and healthy environment. And then, there's a recent win in Ecuador around the use of flares, right? Also brought against a state entity. So can you just speak a bit about this increase in sort of youth-driven lawsuits?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I also want to say, with regard to this question, it does sort of capture some really positive things that are happening through the law and the climate realm. There's this incredible victory in Montana. It's now on appeal, brought by a bunch of children, claiming that, that state's policy toward the fossil fuel industry, they literally approved every licensing request of every oil company in history. They never denied one. The state of Montana violated their rights under the Montana state constitution to a clean environment. And, it's an example of all sorts of creative litigations that are taking place all over the United States and world right now, using whatever legal mechanisms people can kind of use. Puerto Rico, for example, 16 municipalities in Puerto Rico are using the same federal RICO statute that Chevron used against me, against the fossil fuel industry. California just sued, several oil majors in the American Petroleum Institute, state of California, using a consumer protection law that alleges the industry's deception over climate change, trying to hide it and lie about it for so many years, violates the consumer protection statute in that state. And this could
Connecticut brought one previously, the state that some of
yeah,
us are
yeah.
now. So.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
copycat lawsuit. I'm only mentioning,
exactly. A
yeah, I'm
bigger
only
state, but a
yeah,
copycat.
it is copycat.
Mhm.
Massachusetts is done, but I'm only mentioning California because California is such a big, powerful state. Its economy, I think, is the 8th largest in the world if it were to be a country. When California moves on something, that can literally change the entire industry and I think sink it. But I also want to make this point. A lot of these cases have been sort of floundering in the courts for a few years. They're starting to pick up steam. Why? They're starting to pick up steam, I think, because of the climate justice movement. That is, people like us, people on this call who care about these issues, who are out there protesting and pushing the conversations and pressuring the decision makers and creating an environment in the world where people just have more consciousness of the fact that we're reaching the tipping point of irreversible climate damage in ways that are going to make things really bad forever. So I think even judges are starting to even conservative judges are starting to seep into their consciousness that they too can be affected. In the business sector, business leaders are realizing this is unsustainable. And I think a lot of this is a function of the great work, the organizing, the movement organizing in the climate justice area that has taken place in the United States and all over the world. I mean, courts generally lag behind what goes on. I mean, what goes on outside courts. I mean, my experience as a lawyer is you simply cannot solve some of the deepest problems in society just by the four corners of the law or the four corners of the courtroom. Like, you have to see the law as an extension of something, that happens in terms of political organizing outside the courthouse. So I think that was true, obviously, in the U.S. civil rights movement. And it's true. There's just so many examples of that. Unfortunately, in law school, again, I don't know how many lawyers or law students are on the call, but in the United States, law schools generally, try to teach you to be a lawyer. They don't connect this up to what I'm talking about. I've been speaking, by the way, at a lot of law schools, including Yale, over the last couple of years. I get invited. The institution, by the way, never invites me. It's only professors like Professor Poggi or, professors in the law school or student groups. There's a tremendous hunger among law students to learn about how to do this work, to learn about the things I'm talking about. And I have one particular experience. It might even be a bizarre, even outlier experience, but I think it has some real universal meaning underneath it. But law schools need to expand the curriculum to include classes and how to do entrepreneurial human rights work that involves what I would call multi-platform advocacy. That is, lawyers who do advocacy in and out of court, align with community groups and protest movements. There's almost nothing on that in most law schools. I'd say in every law school. So it's important people sort of understand what's possible if you come up with these creative approaches. And I think we're seeing a lot of movement, as you point out, in the litigation space that's positive. But I also think it would be a mistake to think we can solve all these problems in the litigation space alone.
Thank you. So I see, is it Mihal? He has a hand up.
Mihai?
Yes,
Hi,
yes,
okay,
yes.
hi, okay.
Hi, and thank you so much for the presentation, and congrats for this amazing fight you are having. I mean, you are inspiring people all over the world. I wanted to ask you if you know about Chevron's case in Romania. So it was a big thing on Chevron trying to do shale gas extraction in Romania. And it was faced by a very active society. There were, many activists from Romania, but also from abroad. This was in between 2012 and 2014, and eventually Chevron quitted and left Romania. This got into court, I think, in Paris, and Romania won the case, and Chevron had to pay like a big amount of money. I don't know, something like, I don't know. I have to look. But if you know about this, and if you looked also and try to connect the map of the mess that Chevron is doing all around the world, in addition to what you are talking about Latin America and the specific case that you are involved in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So Chevron operates in dozens and dozens of countries around the world, as do most oil majors. To keep track of all of their activities and whether they comply with environmental laws, human rights laws, is a full-time job for 20, 25 people. I mean, it's extraordinary. I will say this, there is a really good report written by Dr. Nan Greer, Greer. You probably know it. I think it mentions the case of Romania, but it tried to document all of Chevron's sort of environmental issues and potential liabilities in countries all over the world. And you can get it. God, I forget the name of it. I have copies sitting over here, but it's by Dr. Nan Greer. And, it's complicated because these companies have so many more resources than we do. And, I've been mostly focused, obviously, on what Chevron did in one particular country, but I'm also aware of many places around the world where Chevron has caused environmental harm. I mean, I think there's literally trillions of dollars of environmental harm that Chevron and the other oil majors have on their hands. Not to mention, that's just pollution, by the way. That's not even the global climate change issue. And I think one reason why Chevron went after me so hard, by the way, they used 60 law firms and 2,000 lawyers to target me and my colleagues, is because they were so threatened with the idea that vulnerable communities with very few resources could actually align with lawyers like myself and others and donors and investors to finance these cases. They really felt like they not only had to try to win the case, they wanted to kill off the idea that you could do a case like this. Okay, so it sounds like in Romania, the people who organized were incredibly successful. And it just shows you can be successful doing this work. I mean, we were successful and we're still fighting. We're going to get there. I actually believe the people of Ecuador will recover the money they're owed by Chevron. And again, make no mistake, the reason I don't have a passport is because we're successful, we're effective. But, all of these things, you got to keep pushing, got to keep fighting, you got to be very, very determined. But, Chevron is an example of a company that will stop at nothing to maintain its privileges and profits, even if the whole planet is being destroyed. I personally don't believe there's a single government on the face of this planet that has the intestinal fortitude to go after them. Because Chevron has so much money, whenever that begins to happen, they just spend money to control the government.
And actually, even the activists, I mean, in the case of Romania, because I know personally some of the activists there, and we got in the situation that they were afraid to talk with their friends. We were their friends because they didn't know who to trust anymore at that moment. And then like Maria Olteanu and other activists, I mean, they were followed on the streets by various people that were approaching them and saying, you have to chill, you have to stop what you are doing, we know where you live, etc. And then one by one they took each individual and they were threatening them.
Well, it's interesting. So that's what they do. You got to, if you're going to do this work, you need to be prepared for that. And have solidarity and have, groups. It's much stronger to act in groups, and not have any one individual be too far out in front of the others. I mean, they have to sort of perceive that there's no one person they can get rid of, and then the thing will end. They have to perceive it'll never end. There's too many people. I think if I made one mistake in the Ecuador case, I was really out front. I was in the media, and I had sort of become the face of the case. And, there are various reasons for that. I'm not going to beat myself up about it, but like, it's really hard to get people to play that role, and to find people who know how to play that role. So I think I was a bit vulnerable, but I hear what you're saying, and it's very, very important to operate and organize in ways that create collective power. And, they hire investigations firms all over the place to intimidate people, and they'll even kill people if they feel like it's worth it and they can get away with it. I mean, I believe my life has been at risk from them. And I think one reason it's difficult for that to happen, I mean, first of all, I'm not so sure I threaten them to that degree at this point, but one reason it's difficult for that to happen with a guy like me is I'm too high profile, and you gotta, it's a game, right? They play the game, and you gotta understand their game. Their game is to get what they want through any means necessary, even if it's illegal. I mean, they look at illegality as just a cost benefit. Like, there's no moral principles like, oh, we can't do anything illegal. I mean, there might be, some of their lawyers might say that, but like, the people who run these companies, it's all a risk analysis. If they feel like there's so much risk that they need to engage in illegal activity, and they think they can get away with it, or that it's the benefit is worth the risk, they will do that. And they do that all the time. I got followed for months. I live in Manhattan. I'm in New York City right now. And me and my family, I mean, I would literally walk on the street, and there were 3 cars with 2 Chevron spies in each car. And they were in different directions. Like, one was facing this way in the street, that way, to be able to follow me wherever I went. And you know what the crazy part? They didn't try to hide it. They actually wanted me to know they were doing it, because it was an intimidation mechanism. Like, they want you to know they can do that, and that they are doing it. But look, the only way to deal with that, again, is to enjoy it. I mean, I don't mean to be glib about it, but it's like, you are so good at what you do, they have to spend money doing that to try to intimidate you. And it really, honestly, is affirmation that you're being effective. You just need to make sure you don't, that you can deal with it. But you've got to flip it around, even psychologically. It's not a problem. It's a sign you're being successful. But also, you got to deal with it so you can continue building your movement off of it. Because also, there will be people in movements who do get intimidated. It's totally understandable, which is why solidarity is so important. I mean, I listen, when I got sued for $60 billion, the most money anyone's ever been sued for in the United States. It was like crazy. It was like everyone I knew in the legal profession in New York just suddenly evaporated. Like, I couldn't get anyone to even reach out to me, take my calls. I had to completely rethink my life. And that took a few months. And now it's 10, 12 years later. I'm great, because like, I have all these people who understand what happened and who agree with me and understand the truth. But like, at the beginning, they come in with these powerful strikes, to try to just kill it off, hoping I'll quit, jump off a building. That'll be the end of it. But instead, I fought. And now, like, I think we are in the ascendancy, not them. But like, it's very hard psychologically when that kind of thing happens to take the blow and keep going. I'm not gonna lie. Like, you think about all sorts of possibilities at that point. And I had a little kid, my son, who's now 17, when this first started, was like 4 or 5. And I'll tell you, the one thing that really kept me going was him. Because I looked at him and I'm like, this dude deserves to have a dad he can be proud of. And I knew if I just kept going, even if it was hard, if I just handled it with dignity and truth and poise, he would be proud of me. Because I knew someday a 4-year-old is going to get on Google when he's 10 or 11 or 12 and figure it out. And I knew at that point, I wanted my son to be able to read about his dad in a way that he could be proud. And that, I mean, I'm not saying that was the only thing that kept me going, because my clients and caring about people in Ecuador who I knew and loved and still love was a huge, huge factor, obviously, as well. But like, there's all sorts of things that factor into it. But I would say the most important thing is having love, support, and solidarity, and keep building that. Solidarity is the best drug. People, I'm not commenting on people taking, drugs to deal with whatever issues they have. I mean, whatever, that's between you and your doctor and whatever. But, solidarity is a drug. It's effective. Like, it gives you power and strength. And, it takes time to build, but man, it's everything. And people talk about solidarity and movements. I didn't really understand fully, even close to fully, what it meant till I needed it myself. I mean, right now in DC, there's 100,000 people marching in solidarity with civilians in Gaza, who are being slaughtered right now. I'm sorry. It's my opinion, okay? You don't think that the civilians in Gaza who are suffering, like, you can't even fathom, that doesn't mean something to them to know that people all over the world are marching for them? So, the solidarity is key. And I will say, when you design your campaign, if you want to do this kind of work, design into your strategy the need to really build a movement around it. So you yourself can be healthy psychologically and secure as much as you can the whole time.
Thank you so much.
Speaking of solidarity, well, is there anyone? I don't want to. I have a question if others.
You can see when people ask
Okay.
questions, I tend to give really weak answers. My apologies.
Okay, so waving hand from Deborah. Okay.
Daniele had a hand, I think.
Okay.
I've been looking for
Deborah
that
was
little
first, but Deborah was,
Thanks. I've been looking for that little hand that you can show, and I can't find it. I have literally spent the last 10 minutes looking for it. And
In reactions, and then you have this smiley face, and you click on it, and it's there.
I didn't see that, but okay. When I first started out, I had one question for you, Stephen, and it grew and grew until now. I can see that we're going to have an hour-long conversation at some point. But my entire life has been going through circumstances, not as dramatically and never as famously, but going through circumstances like you've gone through. And first of all, I want to just absolutely, thank you and say that you're my hero. Second of all, I want to say that you're absolutely right, that when these bad things start to happen, it means you're winning. It means you're having a huge impact. And when I didn't understand that, I was terrified, but then I started to see the pattern over the years, over the decades, very sadly. The more I was threatened with either lawsuits or with being killed, it meant it was always happening at the point in time when what I was doing and the people I was working with were doing was becoming very effective. I also want to totally agree with you that it has been my observation that you have to find a balance between not putting yourself so far out front that you become a target, so that they think that if they get rid of you, they can get rid of the whole movement. So you have to be careful not to do that. It's got to be evident that there's an entire movement and lots of people. But at the same time, if you know something and you're the only one who knows it, you can't leave it like that. You've got to get your information out there. So you have to balance between not getting too far out there, but also putting your information out right away so that they can't stop it from getting out by killing you. And the one question that I want to ask you, because I've often wondered about this and struggled with it, is, you know, at what point do they make the decision that instead of going after you legally and, you know, threatening lawsuits or filing them or whatever, that they decide they just need to kill you? Because I've been in that situation many times, and it's not really clear to me how they're making that decision. Do you have any insight into that? And this is relevant from the early 80s through this very year. I've had death threats and had to go into hiding and been under police protection and had to, you know, take all kinds of measures to protect myself. So do you have any insight?
Well, the only thing I said, first of all, thank you for your nice comments. You know, what I'd say is it's impossible to really completely know how they're thinking internally, but it is possible to know that they are thinking internally. Okay. So, you know, what that means is they are engaging in these discussions and thought processes. Most CEOs and high-level executives of oil companies are smart enough to not engage in these conversations themselves. They happen at another level so that higher ups can be protected. They happen with the lawyers and the intel agencies, and often they use, you know, they use surrogate foreign-based, the US companies use surrogate foreign-based intelligence operatives, often ex-CIA types, Mossad types who work in other countries, like say Mexico or someplace where there's less legal protection, to do the dirty work so they can have plausible deniability. What always has scared me the most is that some kind of person at a lower or mid-level in the company would do something without really understanding that it would not be good for the company, and that would harm me or someone I'm working with. You know, I also think there's a lot of vulnerability when you travel to certain countries where, you know, that are unstable, or there's a lot of violence, and, you know, things can just happen. So it doesn't look like it is what it is. You know, I tell a lot of my family and friends, if I were to die an unnatural death, to please don't accept whatever explanation is given officially, that it must be investigated. But ultimately, you know, when you believe in this stuff, you have to take precautions, be smart, but you just go forward. I mean, you know, look, the worst is to stop doing the work. That's what they want you to do. They want you to quit. So you just have to deal with it. I just want to tell, though, the young people on this call, like what Deborah and I are sort of talking about is very, very, very unlikely to hit you. I just want you to know that. Like, these are just, this happens in like situations where there's a lot of money at stake or a lot of reputational risk in play. And most campaigns don't involve that. You know, they're sort of at levels that the corporate world can tolerate. They account for those types of things. They account for the fact that they're going to look bad often with what they do. You know, they did not account for the fact indigenous peoples in Ecuador could win a $10 or $20 billion judgment. That's why they had to try to destroy this. And that's why they started to maybe think about the things we're talking about. But I think in the typical case that you know is maybe smaller in scale, you know, there's not these threats. I mean, it's hard. You know, I'm not saying there's nothing to deal with. There's often intense resistance even to that. But like these types of things generally don't come up. So I don't want people to feel like they're going to have to deal with this type of stuff if they do this work. Just be aware that some of this stuff does happen in some situations.
In my experience, it's always been around minerals extraction. It's been around mining.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Danielle,
If we still have time, otherwise I would let Thomas wrap up. Okay.
you can take one more question. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I was bothered by the passage in which you said that the three most progressive judges in the Supreme Court stayed silent, And I am suspecting they might have some kind of legalistic explanation for that I won't understand because I'm not a scholar of law. Do you have an explanation or an opinion about the deeper political issues involved in that silence of those judges?
I do. I'll try to keep it short. I mean, basically, the institution of the law, I think in any society, generally reflects the power structure of that society. So, like, if you go to Cuba, you have a certain legal system that reflects that power structure. You know, in this kind of wealthy, corporate capitalist society, you have a court system that reflects that power structure. I think that the reason the three so-called progressives, and they're not really progressive, they're just sort of centrist in the US political context, didn't move on this has to do with factors related to their fear, that I think, of helping a guy who was helping foreign indigenous people, really be effective in a huge way against an American oil company. The divide in the US Supreme Court right now, it's a 6-3 hard right to centrist, split, doesn't generally extend to issues of economic power and corporate power. I mean, the 9 justices are all pretty much in agreement on how the economic sector needs to work. The differences that you read about mostly come in sort of the social milieu, abortion, and certain areas that where there really are legitimate differences of opinion about. But on the economic stuff, I mean, there's a ton of 9-0 decisions, even though you read about how the court is divided on basic economic issues, or 8-1 or 7-2. So, I think the funny thing about the two, right-wing judges who helped me, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, is like they, based on principle, were completely offended by the idea of a private corporate prosecution from a judge. And a lot of that came out of the Federalist Society philosophy that they don't like judicial activism. Like, they felt my judge who did this, who appointed Chevron to prosecute me, was an activist judge. Because, the conservatives don't want judges to be activists. And that's sort of where they were coming from. But they were also, I think, completely offended by the idea this could go down. I mean, Gorsuch wrote in the opinion, and what he wrote, he said, the Constitution does not allow what happened here. I mean, real simple, quite elegant sentence. The Constitution does not allow what happened here. And believe me, he wrote that not because he has any sympathy for my work helping indigenous peoples.
And something similar happened in the decision that you were petitioning from, right? Wasn't there a dissent by a Federalist Society judge and not by all other judges?
Yeah. So, in the US, there's the trial court, there's the first level appellate court, then there's the Supreme Court in the federal system. And in my initial appeal at the first level appeals court, you get 3 judges, and I had, the decision is usually 3-0. I mean, they usually almost always agree. In my case, it was 2-1. There was a dissent that was 19 pages long, written by a very hard right judge appointed by Donald Trump, Judge Menashe. But it was brilliantly written, and it was totally on point and correct. So I do think it's a mistake to be too reductionist and just assume if you're a Federalist Society judge, you're lost. I mean, there's a lot of conservative judges in America who believe in the damn rule of law. They're not doing what this judge did, which is, I think, abuses power. We might disagree on the philosophy, but like they do make good faith efforts to enforce the rule of law. In my case, the judge, I think, didn't make any good faith efforts. He made bad faith efforts to weaponize the law to try to destroy a legitimate legal case through the vehicle of me, this person. So, by the way, for those who want to understand the dynamics of the US Supreme Court and how it really became, I think, captured by the corporate sector, there's a great book I want to recommend called The Scheme by Sheldon Whitehouse, who's a US Senator from Rhode Island. But he traces this whole really 40-year effort by the fossil fuel industry and its allies to control the US Supreme Court, because it's the one non-democratic branch of our three branches of government. Like, you know, they can't really win elections fair and square, right? They can't control the Congress as much as they like, but they can, you know, if you can just control 5 of 9 justices, you can control 90% of policy in this country. And they've done it. Read the book. It's called The Scheme. I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you. Thomas, do you want to say anything in wrapping up, or?
I think we have to
Mhm.
wrap up and hand over to Mihai. The one thing that I wanted to emphasize is, or amplify, is what Stephen said about the Chevron judgment being enforceable in other countries. So I see that as a potential promising avenue of continuing, namely maybe on a pro bono basis or maybe on a contingency basis, to get excellent lawyers in countries where Chevron has ample assets to continue this case, you know, and I think that would be very helpful. But anyway, we have no more time to discuss it, but I'll turn it over to Mihai, who will chair the next session. But I also want to thank Annie Decker for chairing the present session so ably.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks to Stephen, of course.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I wanted to first thank everyone for inviting me. I really enjoyed this discussion. And if people want to get more involved in my personal situation, we have a website called freedonziger.com. And on it, there's articles. We update it, and you can sign up via your email and get regular updates about the case and the kind of stuff we're doing around not only the issue of the Ecuador case, but some broader human rights issues we're working on now. So again, it's freedonziger.com. And thanks to everyone. I know everyone's doing good work. I support you. And thank you for supporting me. I really appreciate it.